मुच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः।
श्री कृष्णाय नमः। श्री गोपी जनवल्लभाय नमः। श्रीमदाचार्य चरणकमलेभ्यो नमः। श्री गुसाई जी परम दयालवे नमः। श्री गुरवे नमः। चिंता संतान हंतारो यत्पादाम्बुजरेणवः स्वीयानां तान् निजाचार्यान् प्रणमामि मुहुर्मुहुः। यदनुग्रहतो जन्तुः सर्वदुःखातिगो भवेत् तमहं सर्वदा वन्दे श्रीमद्वल्लभनन्दनम्। अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। नमामि हृदये शेषे लीलाक्षिराब्धिशायिनं लक्ष्मीसहस्रलीलाभि सेव्यमानं कलानिधिं चतुर्भिश्च 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 त्रिभिस्तथा षड्भिर्विराजते योऽसौ पञ्चदा हृदये मम। नमो भगवते तस्मै कृष्णायाद्भूतकर्मणे रूपनाम विभेदेन जगत्क्रीडति यो यतः। नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं चैव ततो जयमुदीरये। सच्चिदानन्दरूपाय विश्वोत्पत्त्यादिहेतवे तापत्रय विनाशाय श्रीकृष्णाय वयं नमः। कृष्णं वंदे जगद्गुरुम्। Welcome back to the series of Life Solution in 2021, a Vedic lifestyle. As you all know me, I'm Aditya, and Prempuri Ashram Trust has organized this wonderful series because it's meant for youngsters, and moreover, it is going to deep-rootedly connect you with your own problems. If we are failing to do so, let me know in the chat or let me know in the comment section. But if we are doing it, please shower some love by subscribing the channel, and at the same time add some comments so that we can understand and we can get your feedback as to how we can make this better. Last 5 days we have been speaking a lot about the scriptures and how they impact our life, and what is the role of Upanishad, what is the role of Smriti, what are the role of the Veda and the Vedanta, the philosophy, and all of these. We had numerous quotations, numerous examples. We went through a lot of things. And today, I am going to start with a Subhashit. A Subhashit that allows me to talk about the world is one family. Why is the world one family? In our Sanatan Dharma, we have thought about samskar. Wherever there are samskar, there is a Sanskriti. And Maha Upanishad, Sahit, including Maha Upanishad, there have been multiple places where this particular verse has come. Maha Upanishad, Adhyay 4, Shlok number 71 says, Ayam nijah paro veti ganana laguchetasam udara charitanam tu vasudhaiva kutumbakam. Now, people who have big hearts not in terms of, I'm sorry, even I live in a house, so such incidences keep on happening, that you're shooting and the food is also being cooked at the same time. I'm sorry for that, but please bear with me. So situations are like these where there's a huge heart. When I say huge heart, I don't mean it by the size, but what I mean is someone who is a giver, someone who has a who can give away things without even thinking twice. These people are generally open. Now they don't think he's my friend and he's not my friend, and I know him and I don't know him. They don't calculate. They don't keep a track. However, people who keep track, they are considered to have a smaller mind. They are considered to have a smaller heart. They are considered to have a smaller thinking. People who have large hearts, they feel Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. This entire world is my family. And this is exactly what has been imbibed or inscribed in our constitution. More than the constitution, it has been imbibed and inscribed in the parliament. The minute you enter the parliament, the first plaque that says is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The world is my family. Now, it's extremely critical for us to understand in the Vedic literature, some people don't have the rights or some people don't have the capacity to understand Vedas. Some people don't have that much linguistic capacity to understand and interpret the Purana. Some people don't have the linguistic capacity to even interpret any other scripture. Does that mean that our institution of the Vedic culture ignores them? Absolutely not. Apparently, we have been so inclusive. We've been so inclusive as humankind that even if someone doesn't know how to handle these situations, we believe in a Sutratmak Bhasha, smaller statements. We don't write long motivational quotes. We write statements that come under 32 characters, and those are enough for the other people to understand. And today, along with culture, we'll try to focus on something called as Subhashit. First of all, Sanskrit as a language has its own importance. A lot of people debate about its originality. A lot of people debate about how old it is, and a lot of people debate about the authenticity of it. They feel that Tamil or Telugu is more ancient in comparison to what Sanskrit is. However, the mantras were there in the cosmos, and since the mantras were in the cosmos, I don't think the mantras were written in any other language. The mantras were typically written, since they were vibrations. If you consider Samaveda is something that is Sam. That means it can be sung. And when Samaveda is sung, it has some beats. So whenever they are reciting a mantra, they have a recitation plan wherein they have to increase their voice, lower their voice, utilize the principles of Sangeet, and moreover, the entire Sangeet or the Sangeet Shastra has actually been inspired from the Samaveda. Similarly, when we talk about Yajurveda, Yajurveda has more of prose, right? It doesn't have. So there are two concepts in Sanskrit. One is Gadya and one is Padya. Apparently, Rigveda has more Padya and Yajurveda has more Gadya. That means Yajurveda has uneven verses, and hence recitation of Yajurveda is slightly tougher. Whereas Rigveda has a systematic order of verses and it's more Padya in nature. So when I say Padya, so it starts with Agni Mide Purohitam, right? So there is a flow. Whereas when you recite Yajurveda Ikher Tor Je Twa, right, there are more complications in it, and it is more in the Gadya format. Now anything and everything that we speak has a format. When we speak English, There's a format to it. There's an American way of it. There's an Indian way of it. There's a British way of it. There's an Australian way of it. Finally, we as global citizens now have accepted Indian as an accent altogether, and that's why even Google Maps and all the other feature apps as well have been utilizing that. Having said that, it's crucial for us to understand any Sanskriti, any culture is highly dependent on the language that they use. Now, you may consider the Roman Empire, you may consider the Chola Empire, you may consider the Maratha Empire, you may consider the Harshvardhan Empire, you may consider the empire of Mughals, you may consider any random empire in this world. It's high, or even Constantinople for particular space. It's highly dependent on the language. Reason being, it needs to have one set of language across to have a conversation. Once in a while in Bharatvarsh, Sanskrit was the only language that was being spoken. It was said it was a Deva Bhasha, it was Girvana Vani, and it is even said it was very Madhur. Someone who knows mathematics can easily learn Sanskrit. Someone who knows Sanskrit can easily learn mathematics. Because Sanskrit as a language requires Vyakaran, requires grammar, and this grammar is nothing but a set of rules. These are a set of equations and theorems which have been proven, and hence it becomes easy for someone to make the most of it by learning this particular language. Even coders have established a principle and a theory saying that if we want to code, the most perfect language that is applicable for coding is actually Sanskrit. Now, a lot of people feel, but Sanskrit is tough. Remember one thing, you never learn a language as a subject in school. That's not enough. You need to practice that language every now and then. Let's consider Marathi for a matter of fact. Marathi could have been a subject for a lot of us in our school days. We know Marathi because whenever a police is catching hold of us, we try to speak. We know Marathi because when we have to deal with a local municipal corporation commissioner or anyone who stays in Mumbai or Maharashtra, we try to speak in Marathi and try to develop the connection because we know how sensitive we all are towards our language. Unfortunately, Gujaratis are not so, because with Gujarati, you can speak in any language. You speak the language of money and possibly they understand everything. Maybe you don't need to speak Gujarati as well in front of them. Moreover, if Maharashtrians can stand for their own language in their own locality, a similar statement happens with France. When you go to France and you speak English, possibly they won't listen to you because of their prehistory with the Britishers and the English and the British and the English people. However, the situation is a little different now because of technology. If you have the right kind of apps, it can translate it for you. But nevertheless, what I try to say is it's crucial for us to figure out how we learn a language. Reason being, we've learned our mother tongue not with grammar, but by practicing in front of our mother. We know Gujarati, we know Hindi, or we know Marathi because we know the other languages because we have practiced that language in our school days. Like, for example, I studied Hindi for first 7 years, from first standard to seventh standard. And moreover, all our Hindi movies were pretty much the reason why my Hindi could have been spoiled, or possibly the translated movies that we might have seen, right? So those all factors definitely play a role. Those factors definitely play a role in a culture. Any language cannot be just learned with grammar. The first thing you need is vocal practice. You need to listen to it, you need to understand it, and then you can practice it. The second aspect is the writing part of it. You should also be able to write what you are speaking. And the third aspect that comes is reading. Reading comes first, writing comes next, and post which comes the grammar part of it. And that's similar to what Sanskrit does as well. First of all, you get the Uchcharan Gnan. That means you learn to speak. The next thing that you do is you get to learn you get to read it. You get to read what is being there. And the third thing comes up is the way you write. Now, apparently in the previous era, where there was no written format of Sanskrit, everything was pretty much oral. So you learn through communication, you learn through conversation, and that's the beauty about Sanskrit. You need to invest time, right? If at this age I am investing time, despite having learned Sanskrit in my school days for like 4-5 years, I'm reinvesting my time to restudy that entire language so that I can be more sure about what am I going through, right? It becomes very much easy for all of you to what do we say? Uh, uh, yeah, it becomes very much easy for all of you as well to come up with the language, to come up with the knowledge of that language. And moreover, you need a like-minded group. I'll give you a simple example. We being in India, we want to learn Chinese because Chinese is one of the most demanded languages in the world. Second, we being in India, we want to learn Mandarin, again a form of Chinese, which is quite in demand because China has stopped trade and we need translators to speak with them. Then we want to learn German because German is closest to Sanskrit. We want to learn French because French is the second most spoken language. Third being Spanish because Spanish is about in the top 7 of it again. Right? So apart from English, we want to learn all of these languages, and all of a sudden, Sanskrit has become a distinct language or extinct language. Reason being, no one is speaking about it, and people felt it was never being spoken. Oh, hello, that's not the reality. I think I rapped too much. I'll go slow. Sanskrit as a language was considered to be a Laukik language, as in it was being utilized by people on regular grounds. And if I'm not wrong, initial scriptures, not just initial scriptures, even scriptures till last 500 years have been in Sanskrit. However, it started with Jainism and Buddhism. They started using Pali and Ardhamangini for the preaching, so that a lot of common masses could understand that. Right? So since that time, we have seen a decline in Sanskrit, and that's the reason why Jainism and Buddhism do not have 100% scope in Sanskrit. All their verses are not Sanskrit in nature. Moving further, the language declined over the period of time because people didn't get any returns. Today, as a translator, if you translate Chinese or French or German or Spanish, you're getting you get loads of money. Moreover, if you know English, possibly you can be a tuition teacher, or at least you can do your common job, and possibly you can get a fundamental job at even the government sector or in the private sector particularly. If you're great at communications, you can be business developers, have your own setups, negotiate with people left, right, and center, and earn tons of money at the same time. What happens with Sanskrit is we don't have an additional motivation. Let me give you one. A lot of people keep on asking me, what should I read? Which Bhagavad Gita should I read? Now, irony of life is Bhagavad Gita is one. There's no multiple format of Bhagavad Gita. But apparently, there have been so many authors and interpreted in so many ways. A lot of people ask me, should I read C.V. Raman's, Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan's, or should I read Bal Gangadhar Tilak's, or should I read Max Muller? Should I read Bhagavad Gita as it is by Srila Prabhupada? Or should I read Bhagavad Gita of Vinoba Bhave? Or should I read Bhagavad Gita of Pushti Marg? And I say, oh, hello, boss. First of all, you need to have a basic sense of translation. Okay. Reading Bhagavad Gita in English is a disaster. Reading Bhagavad Gita in Hindi is a blessing. I'll tell you why. Yogeshwara, Rishikesha, Dhananjaya, Kaunteya, Gudakesha, Chanchalam, Manaha. All these words, how will we translate them into English? We'll have a series of 5-6 words to translate one word. And we might not even know the deeper meaning of why it is said Gudakesha, Kaunteya, Partha. Now, it might just turn out to be a normal translation, but there's a deep meaning behind it. Why Rishikesha has been emphasized somewhere, or why Partha has been emphasized somewhere, or why Kaunteya has been emphasized somewhere, or why Dhanurdhara has been emphasized somewhere. These are all fundamental reasoning that we need to know in Bhagavad Gita. It's not just randomly there. It's there for a specific reason. And if we want to know the reason, first thing, at a preliminary stage, we need to learn the language. It's only when we learn the language, it becomes much easier for us to do the interpretation. So, first of all, to give you an overview, try learning the language first. You can learn this language online. There are enough teachers who can teach you that. And moreover, don't experiment reading Gita by yourself, because Gita has so many oxymorons. Because in some adhyaya, Lord is saying something else, and in some adhyaya, Lord is saying something else. However, these solutions provided by Lord, Bhagavan Shri Krishna, is actually situational. It's situational as to what you're facing in your life. It depends upon what you're going through in your life. Your life situation gives you a life solution, and that's the beauty of Bhagavad Gita. Whatever we go through in life, there is a consequent effect, and at the same time, Lord is prescribing a solution to us. It depends on what kind of belief system do we have. Do we believe in God? Do we believe in religion? Do we believe in karma? Do we believe in jnana? Do we believe in yoga? Do we believe in bhakti? Or we are a mishra of all of these, or we are only and only dedicated to Bhagavan Shri Krishna? Depends on the various kind of situations that we come from, and hence it's extremely crucial and important for us to know the language, context, and eventually learn the Bhagavad Gita from a teacher, from a preceptor, from a guru, from someone who can explain things to you. And moreover, now a lot of people feel I'm going to speak very, very inclusive and my thoughts are not open, but I'm going to give you a piece of advice. In the Vedic literature, the first thing that we need to understand is which school of thought we come from. Were our parents involved in one segment of God or multiple segments of God? Whom do we pray? And from that perspective, which community do we belong to? Which sampradaya do we belong to? Post which you should be learning Bhagavad Gita. I'll tell you why. I come from a Vaishnava background. Okay. My purpose of learning Bhagavad Gita is definitely to get life clarity, but at the same time, it's also to understand Lord in a different way. Now, if I want to understand Lord, and I come from a Vaishnava background, which is a Pushtimargiya Vaishnava, for me, Vallabhacharyaji's principle is the doctrine, and I need to understand the philosophy of Bhagavad Gita from that perspective. Now, if I start taking another philosopher's interpretation, I will create a cocktail of my own, and then the truest meaning or the essence of the sampradaya goes away. Similarly, Bhagavad Gita always gives you a solution which is desired by you in that given situation. It's not a mere religious book. It's the epitome of spirituality. Reason being, it has so much in-depth philosophy which can actually rack your brains and make you going in life. But for that, our command over the language is essential. Only then we can learn it smoothly. I'm not saying you can't learn it smoothly if you don't know Sanskrit. But remember one thing, when you're winning a race, would you like to win a race with 1 millimeter or 1 second difference? Or would you like to win a race by a mile or by 10 to 15 seconds or a minute at the same time? A cutthroat competition happens when we are in a situation where we don't know stuff, or where the opponents are also quite capable of us. But what about we going an extra mile and practicing so much so that we can be better learners? Eventually, our entire life is all about learning. Bhagavad Gita by itself is one of the most translated scripture in the entire world. It has been translated to Urdu, Farsi, Persian, Portuguese, Spanish, Hindi, Gujarati, Malayalam, Tamil, Telugu. You name the language and it has been translated in those particular ways. Now, here's a small context. You can read neutral Hindi-based translations first if you are a Hindi, or if you know Hindi, if you're a Hindi-speaking person, or if you know Hindi. The reason being, it will help you first understand why certain words have been utilized. The step 2 should be entering into the English zone. Because, see, English, despite being such an enriched language, it is way poor in comparison to Sanskrit. Sanskrit has definite words, and it's extremely impossible to translate certain words. For example, rasa. Rasa can never be translated as juice. Some people say it can be translated as a melody, but I'm not really sure how melody can define. Melody itself has a limitation. After a certain point of time, the melody is no more melody. You feel it as a burden. Whereas rasa can never be a burden. Rasa leads you to bliss. And hence, it's not me who says this. It's Rajiv Malhotra of Infinity Foundation, who has been a prime epitome of translating or writing a scripture or writing a book about let certain words of Sanskrit be the way they are and not let them translated into English. Right? So this is one small request that I want to, make from my end. While you are learning Bhagavad Gita, the first thing that you need to do is ensure that you learn it in Hindi or in Gujarati first, or the common mother tongue that you have, and eventually turn to English. Whose Bhagavad Gita you should read depends on which sampradaya you come from, which background you come from. Accordingly, suggestions can be given to you. Having said that, this was all in context of the language. If a language persists, the culture can sustain. Because imagine this, all our logical, emotional, rational, interpretational, devotional, spiritual, astronomical, astrological, uh, geographical, geological, then psychological, physical, mental, all these research papers that have happened over the period of time, right from Kanad to Gautam to Patanjali to Kapil to Jaimini to Vyasji to Shukdevji to Janmejay to Janak to Naradji to you name the philosophers, or you name the scripture writers, or you name the characters, and they have all spoken in Sanskrit, right? So if you want to know the truest essence of what our religion stands for or what we stand for, it's crucial for us to learn the language. And I think my grandfather used to say this. He had also gone through this similar situation. He was in foreign country, and I think he was in Britain, and someone told him, are you a fox? My grandfather had a very steady response, do I look like a fox to you? And after that, the Britisher didn't say a word to him. Now, when you understand people's language, it gives you an add-on, because you can contribute to that particular conversation. You want an additional motivation to know Sanskrit? If you want to know yourself, try knowing Sanskrit. If you want to learn Gita, try knowing Sanskrit. Once you start knowing Gita, you will also realize that a lot of other scriptures also speak a similar set of language. Well, having said that, let's move away now from the topic of language, because language has been quite a torchbearer for us in last 30 odd minutes, and we have got some idea about how languages function as such over here. Moving forward, after the language comes the tradition. Now, let me tell you one thing. There are two forms of tradition that exist. The first form of tradition allows you to, the first form of tradition is actually dependent on the scriptures. For example, Bharat Varsha has 24 Ekadashis. 24 Ekadashis are nothing but 24 days of fasting. These days of fasting are there so that our digestive system can get some rest. Nothing goes in our stomach, and we can stay healthy. Now, a Nobel Prize laureate from Japan has also considered the theory of fasting as to be very prominent, and has considered the Indian mechanism of fasting that is actually really nice. A recent study from dentistry also says a similar thing, that the younger generation's teeth are going to deteriorate much faster because we have higher consumption of maida. And we all know, where does maida come from? It comes from pizzas, pastas, and burgers and sandwiches particularly, and comes from cakes at the same time. Apparently, the consumption of maida was not equivalent in the Indian culture prior to this. Now, we're going to try and talk something much lighter, and those concepts are culture, heritage, tradition, practices, beliefs, etc., etc. Now, on one side are the traditions that have been prescribed in the scriptures as principles, and those have been implemented over the period of time. For example, donation to Brahmin, donation to needy, donation to people who deserve it, helping people in terms of their calamities, giving food, giving clothes, giving knowledge, are the multiple formats of those which are available particularly. Moving further, situation comes up like a cult or a community creates its own tradition. And when they create their own tradition, even that is considered to be a part of the culture. There could be no religious significance for it, but because they practice it accordingly and hence it is carried forward. For example, Indian marriages. I don't know how people get married in 15 minutes. I don't know how people get married in 30 minutes. I remember my father telling me their marriage ceremony took 4 hours. I was like, what? How? So yeah, it's quite detailed in nature. We have some concept called as Shodash Sanskar. We'll try to know them in the future sessions if we can. If not, never the stress. Prempuri Ashram is kind enough to organize something once again. By the way, if you're listening to me carefully and if you really like what you are listening, just subscribe to the channel on the right side. Well, over here, since we were talking about marriage, let me tell you something. When you go to a Brahmin and you ask him, what is the typical range of getting someone married? He's like 1.5 hours to 2 hours. And then you'll ask what extra time is taken. And then he'll tell you the extra time is taken by the traditions that people have because of their own families and because of their own communities. Like for example, हमारे ત્યાં 3 મામી ન હોય 5 મામી હોય 3 સૌભાગ્યવતી ન હોય 5 હોય हमारे ત્યાં આ પહેલા પોખવાનું હોય हमारे ત્યાં ગ્રહ શાંતિ પછી થતી હોય. Too much tantrums people have, trust me. And all of these have nothing to do with the marriage because the marriage has a Vedic sanskar and it has a prescribed ritual. There's a spiritual reasoning behind it and there's a ritual behind it, which is going to sustain between 1.5 hours to 2 hours. But all these additional rituals, which are communal in nature, they take up much more time than the normal wedding, and hence the wedding goes up to larger number of hours. So even if you might have realized when you go to friends' weddings as well, first of all, that entry with the chaddar, that's a common scenario that has taken place these days. Well, apparently, there's a science behind why the Kanya is being called for in a particular way. And unfortunately, the Bollywood songs have taken the domination over there. Remember one thing, that Kanya was coming, she's a form of Lakshmi. And Lakshmi doesn't come on a Bollywood dance. Lakshmi comes with utmost elegance. And Lakshmi definitely comes with a band. No doubt about it. Because if we read the Sri Suktam, we'll realize Lakshmi doesn't come randomly. Lakshmi always comes with good amount of beats. And what did we do with this? We missed out on the spiritual aspect of it. We missed out on the divine aspect of it. And we made the marriage as a source of entertainment so that some Din Shagnada Chadeya song will play at that particular point of time. Everyone will start feeling emotional as if the girl is going away from your life. Fair point. Girl is going away from the family. No disrespect about it. But hey, there's a science because as I'm telling you, there's a belief that Lakshmi and Narayana are getting married. They have devatas invoked in them. There are no random bodies getting married against each other. At one side, if we are considering the Kanya or the girl to be Lakshmi, you really think that a Bollywood song does her justice? Rather, we do a Sri Suktam. We can have 5 Brahmins reciting the Sri Suktam and make her enter. A lot of people may not like this idea. A lot of people will backlash at this idea as well. But once you come in a situation of higher spirituality, or when you start understanding your culture pretty well, you'll realize that movies that we see are not real marriages. They are the source of entertainment. They are not original marriages. Original marriages require you to sit with your Pandit and understand what are you getting into. Well, nevertheless, I won't speak about the marriage topic right now because I'm also yet to get married. But someday maybe, we'll take up this topic again and try to understand what are the right kind of marriages or right kind of activities that we need to do in the marriage. So my whole point was we were talking about the customs and the rituals. A lot of people get confused between customs and rituals. Rituals is something that has been prescribed by the Shastra. And customs are something that are customary in nature that have been prescribed by the community person. So for example, when it's a Til Ekadashi donating till to Brahmins, it's not a custom. It has been prescribed in the Shastras. But if you do anything, oh, hame to Sankranti na avuch kariye. That avuch kariye is nothing but a custom which has been imbibed in the family itself, or it has been imbibed by the community itself. It's our responsibility, if we take a brief from client or if we take a brief from boss, to understand what kind of activity we are doing and what's the implication of it, or what is the end goal of it, or what is the outcome of it. While we are doing all these activities, just ring up your goddamn Pandit and ask him, what are we doing? Are there certain things that need to be done? You think Pandit, what is his job? He'll say some mantras and he'll come and he'll just take away the money from you. Oh, boss, listen to me. You pay thousands of money for legal consultancies. You pay thousands of money for interior designing consultancy. You spend 30, 40 lakhs in redeveloping your own goddamn house. How can you not invest money for something which is more religious in nature and which is for your spiritual well-being? So many incidences have taken place wherein the mantra shakti has taken over the medical science at a lot of places, or medical science is doing well, but the mantra shakti has been contributing to it to improvise the situation. There are so many concepts like healing, Reiki, Mantra Vidya, healing through doing yagnas, Sakam yagnas. So many of these initiatives have helped people to recover. I'm not saying that it's going to solve your coronavirus problem. However, sometimes when science doesn't go ahead, spirituality steps in, religion steps in, and they solve it. And let me tell you one fact, my friends: religion is handicapped without spirituality. Spirituality is useless without having a ritual. Now, when I say ritual, ritual doesn't mean you need to go to a shivling and offer water and then pray to shivling, and then that's how a ritual is made. No, ritual is also made when you go and feed a dog. That's also a ritual at the end of the day. When you say the truth, even that is a ritual. You follow a certain set of norms and principles. You have certain moral etiquettes. You have certain morality in yourself. That is nothing but practicing, and that practicing is nothing but a ritual. You do meditation, even that is a ritual. Every spiritual activity has a ritual behind it, and every ritual has a spiritual reasoning behind it. These two are impossible to be parallel. I'm sorry, these two are impossible to be away from each other. They are always parallel. They're never perpendicular. If they are perpendicular, there are amendments given in the Shastras in order to amend such acts. One of the most formidable questions that comes to me is, how do you be spiritual? Arey boss, read na. Not everyone who's yelling on social media, a spiritual leader or a motivational speaker. Read. The amount of time you're spending in consumption of content, why don't you shift to books? Why don't you shift to listening to certain podcasts? Why don't you invest your time in such web series which are giving you the true view of religion? Or at least attempting to give you a true view of religion. See, boss, the choices are whether we want to spend our time in money heist or whether we want to learn something more. Or if we can balance it out, even the better. Even better. I hope you all are understanding what message I'm trying to provide over here. If we want to safeguard our own culture, no one else is going to come. We need to stand up for ourselves. Let me tell you one of the major cultural shifts that has taken place in the last 70 years. Weddings before had a concept called as Nath Jamadwan. You had to make your community sit and eat. Listen to the concept: sit and eat. Not stand in a buffet as if some cats and dogs are being fed. Sorry, no offense. I have empathy for cats and dogs. But unfortunately, we human beings have lost some sense. In order to save money, what we have done is we are standing and eating food. Once you read Taittiriya Upanishad and the other Shastras, you will understand how important is food. Anna is considered to be Brahma. If Anna is Brahma, can we really stand and eat that food? Unfortunately, including me, we are doing this activity. But we should have some kind of conscience towards respecting that food. One of the major reasons why we pray food is because it nourishes us. And it allows us to perform our dharma. It allows us to perform our karma. With such situations, do we really want to disrespect food? Nevertheless, we'll talk about it sometime later again. I'm creating a lot of enemies right now, but nevertheless, truth needs to be spoken someday. Our culture made everyone sit in a line, served the food. There were people who used to make people eat in pattal. You know what's a pattal? Pattal is nothing but leaf ka plate, and there's a leaf ka bowl. We never had spoon. We always ate with our hands. Now, as disgusting as people may sound, go in South India and try eating rasam sambar and rice, and as if they give you a spoon directly. Everyone eats with their hand. No one feels disgusting at that given point of time. I don't know what shift of paradigm took place where once we became Bombaikars or once we became people of cities, we just lost the essence. I see people eating pav bhaji with a chammach. How? How can you eat pav bhaji with a chammach? I don't understand it. I've seen people eating pizzas with fork. Okay, rest in peace. Sorry, boss. I can't speak about it. But nevertheless, let me give you a perspective over here. In our Vedic culture, when we start eating, first of all, there's a way of placing things. Okay, all your items that are sweets are on one side, all your raitas on the other side, all your dals and your sabzis are on the other side, all your farsan is on one side, all your forms of rice are on one side, all your carbs are on one side, it's a mechanism of placing what needs to be there, and it's not just in one plate. There are two plates kept beside each other. There's a glass of water. You are supposed to consume water before and during. You're not supposed to consume water after. It's only the achmani that you're supposed to do. Now, we were eco-friendly. We didn't have okay, I understand we used to burn wood logs and that used to create pollution. Fair. Science evolved. We got LPGs, even better. We have CNGs, even better. Now our technology is even better. Fair point. But then we started utilizing steel, we started utilizing aluminum, we started utilizing plastic, and the worst, thermocol. As much ecological we were, we moved away from that. And now there are startups that are creating plates out of leaves and they're selling it for 20 rupees a plate and people are buying it. What happened to people in the last 70 years that they had such a shift of heart? We were doing certain things correctly. We should have continued it the way. Just because population was rising and we had to save our time and efforts, we came up with thermocol. And then after thermocol, consumption increased for 10 years. Plastic-based plates ka consumption increased for 10 years. We started realizing, oh no. You were doing something right. You discarded it thinking this is much better, this is more disposable, this is more perishable. It was not perishable. We realized it at a very later stage. And now we are trying to talk about saving the environment. We were eco-friendly since the beginning. This is what the shift of paradigm has taken place. And this is the difference between ritual and customs. From involving families and friends and everyone to come and eat and celebrate with us, we started considering the વ્યવહાર પક્ષ. આપણે વ્યવહાર કરવો પડે. એ લોકોએ આપણને લગનમાં બોલાવેલા હતા એટલે આપણે એમને લગનમાં બોલાવવા પડે. What in COVID you're talking about વ્યવહાર? With 25 people we are getting married. What વ્યવહાર are we talking about? The situation forced us to adapt and we adapted to it. But if we had a choice, we would do a la grand weddings. Well, fair, we should do a la grand weddings. Reason being, the economy requires money distribution. And as I mentioned earlier as well, whenever a Vedic Karya takes place, a lot of people get money. And I had even taunted about the Pandit and the photographer situation as well. I pretty much remember that. So I'm not against the a la grand weddings. I'm against the wastage that takes place in this a la grand weddings. One of the major wastage is food. The second wastage is the water. Third wastage is because of the utensils that are being utilized. Just because you want to impress your other people, why can't you be slightly more ecological in nature? Make a shift in perspective and invest in the right technology, which is more sustainable. The pattal is extremely biodegradable. You can create biogas out of it. There are compost plants which convert that pattal into biodegradable gas. Acha, that reminds me of some people feel Arya but yagnas create pollution. For all those people who feel yagnas create pollution, I'm here to answer that question. Bhandarkar Institute of Research, Ferguson College, and a lot of other colleges, including universities in Germany, came up with a research paper that when India had Agnihotra, okay, guys, I'm going to touch some people's nerves today, but I have scientific backing. All these universities did a research paper. They went down in the history lines, came up with data about oxygen emission and pollution, considering the factor that the amount of people or the amount of population was also lesser. The cars were also lesser, but they did a specific research on the Vedic lifestyle of Agnihotra. Agnihotra refers to a Brahmin offering yagna or doing yagna puja on daily basis. Brahmins have to contribute to Panchagni and similarly has to perform yagna on daily basis. It is also called as Brahma Yagna, and some advanced Brahmins go through an Agnihotra. That means they have to nourish the Agni on the daily basis. For once, people felt the wood is being cut and being contributed in this yagna. So first of all, trees are never cut, branches are cut. And cutting branches of trees which have quick recovery is the kind of branches that have been consumed in the Vedic culture. So we're not cutting the tree, we're cutting the branches of the tree whose branches come up very quickly. That's the first thing that you need to be aware of. Second thing, all these universities that I mentioned came up with a research paper in their own individual capacities and said, when a yagna is being performed, at the initial stage, there's a contribution to pollution. At a very initial and a primitive stage, and by the way, this has nothing to do with, and it is nothing in comparison of the industrial waste and the carbon emission that is being done by cars. Post which, after the yagna is in process, the levels of oxygen is slightly higher and the level of pollution is actually minimalist in nature. Rather, it is helping in purification of the air. I remember there was this one scandal which took place where 50,000 kilos of sandalwood was being utilized to purify an air, and people were like, hey, what is this? What is this? What is this? Fair point, 50,000 is also a huge, humongous amount of it. However, when Brahmins do a yagna in their own houses, it does environment cleaning, it does spiritual healing, it ensures that bhut pishach and nikat nahi have, those concepts definitely take place. And last but not the least, even the air gets purified. Now, I'm not saying this, my friend. It's the research paper of all these institutions that are saying that they don't contribute to pollution. Rather, they are helpful in securing the environment. Now, imagine if we Brahmins stop doing this. We Brahmins, first of all, have to move to city. That means we have sacrificed our cows. A Brahmin was entitled to have a cow. A Brahmin was entitled to have a Yagnashala. A Brahmin had to take care of all of these things. And what do we land up in? A Brahmin has to go from places to places just to gather money because the society is not taking care of them. I'm not saying it's a Brahmin fault as well that they have, misutilized the opportunity. And a lot of Brahmins these days are going through the entertainment zone. So whenever they're doing a pujan, they'll go through the they'll go through the Sangeet way and recite the entire Hanuman Chalisa during a puja with the orchestra that they carry along. Sometimes you pay more amount of money to the Sangeet wala instead of the Brahmins. I'm not saying we Brahmins are not at fault. But Brahmins, if they don't do their Nitya Karma, they are indirectly contributing to the environment. That's the situation, my friend. Well, nevertheless, let's move forward. Vedic culture, as I told you earlier, it has a lifestyle that has a lesser amount of environment trouble. Okay, now I'll tell you a situation. A lot of people talk about Asti Visarjan. A lot of people talk about dying at Kashi. A lot of people talk about throwing ashes in the rivers. At that time, the pollution was less. Second thing, the contribution of pollution done by ashes versus industrial waste. Just look at some statistics. Third, everyone wants direct moksha and they feel Ganga is the only option. Fourth, ashes have their own implication. Bhasma has its own implication in life as well. We cannot rely on one set of thought perspective and conclude to decisions. We need to speak with people who know religion. We need to speak with people who know customs. We need to speak with people who know these spiritual acts. And we need to have a logical debate with an intention of learning, but not about argument. That will help us get a perspective as to where our religion is standing. Why do we believe in life after birth, life after death? Why is it important for us to perform an act after someone is dead? All these factors play a really important role. And it's not just about me saying that. A lot of pundits as well have observed when after death rites are not being done, a lot of people die in the family. And if we go and sit with our Gaur Bapa, or if we go and sit with our pundits, we'll understand what kind of mechanism are they coming from. And we should be in a place to help them out. Why is no one thinking in a direction to actually help? If you're so tech savvy, why don't you help your pundits to create a PPT of the entire marriage? As in, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening, this is what you're going to do next, this is the reasoning behind it. Why such nourishment is not happening? Because we are never bothered about it. For us, it's all about jazzy photography, being in the eyes of people, talking about showing off that we had a great amount of marriage and we did 10,000 things over there, etc., etc. We never think as if the union of the couple is actually a festival, which requires some amount of some kind of knowledge and some kind of uh, upliftment of our own self. You're not partnering with someone just to mate officially so that you don't have to hang out with other girls and enjoy or other guys and enjoy. You're not mating with someone so that you can increase your protege. You're not mating someone so that you need a friend. You're not mating someone because your other friends are getting made. You're not marrying someone because your other friends are getting married. Just go and understand the deep dive logic of what marriage is, or what is the concept of marriage, or what a Grihastha Ashram stands for. That will help you understand the various customs. That will also help you understand the various acts. That will also help you understand the various activities that we do in religion. Since we are moving towards the end, let's try and see if there are any other quotes that we can consider for our betterment. A lot of people struggle in terms of seeking happiness. See, first of all, when you are a kid, you're doing activities, but you don't know the reasoning behind it. As you grow up, you're not interested in these activities because you're so occupied with 10,000 other things in life. Post which your situation doesn't allow you to contribute somewhere else because your life commitments are such. It's only when you grow in life you realize, now I need to be spiritual, now I need to do something for the religion, now I need to learn certain things. Possibly it's quite late for us to do that, because if you might have seen, our elder generations have made some similar set of mistakes. Now you have a wonderful opportunity over here. You can break this chain. You can develop a mechanism around yourself which will help you learn these concepts much quicker, implement in your real life, See if you have the sense of satisfaction while you're doing any activity. For example, if Ganesh Ji is coming at your house, it's not because Gannu Dada can only stay with you for 1.5 days, or he can stay only with you for 14 days. If you have the right Pancha Devta Pujan, Ganesh Ji can stay with you for your entire life. But for that, you need to invoke your curiosity that how can a Devta like Ganesh stay with me, Ganesh Ji stay with me for my entire life? Why should I only pray him for 1.5 days or 11 days of the Ganesh Chaturthi to Anant Chaturdashi? Why can't I have more days with him? We as Vaishnavas are very lucky because we have Krishna for our entire life, right from the day we are born till the day we die. Krishna Seva is always there for us. We are always there for Krishna Seva. It's actually the other way around, right? So, if you want to invoke that connection with the Almighty, you want to develop that high-spirited relationship with the Almighty, you need to take those efforts. And so that you take efforts, I'm going to leave you with this thought. You want to seek answers, you will find them outside, but the intention will never be found outside. You need to find that intent within you. With that, we've tried to understand the concept of bhasha, and we've tried to understand the concept of rituals and spirituality in today's session. Today's session was much lighter in comparison to the previous session. I'm excited to see you all tomorrow. Until then, Shubham Bhavatu, Krishna Arpanamastu.
Om Shanti.